Alright, so this last video is just looking through some cautions when we're doing the relationship between two quantitative variables. This first one is an important one that some of you may have even heard in another class. Is this because there's a relationship between two things, this correlation, does not mean that one is necessarily causing the other one to happen. So an example of this, one time I'm teaching and it seemed like everyone who was later alphabetically did better in the class. It does not mean that if you switched your last name to Zimbelman that you're going to get an A in the class, as your last name wasn't causing the grade in the course to happen. The second one is an idea of groups. Being careful when you combine things together that you might see that there's a relationship that doesn't really exist if you looked at the groups separately. The third one here is that idea of nonlinear patterns, right? This is why we should always start with a graph. So graphs are very important because it lets us see what's going on with our data before we dive in any further. So I can see should I really fit a straight line to this data set, or is it something that I don't know how to handle yet. This fourth one is the idea of extrapolation. So all that really means is that you're predicting far outside your data. So this goes back to what we were talking about in the end of example 2, when we were being asked about trying to find the predicted number of doctor's visits for a 20-year-old. And we talked about how we shouldn't do that because we don't have values in our data set near 20. That isn't even part of our population. So we want to be careful of using a model to predict outside of the scope of that model. And finally, keep in mind how influential points or outliers can have an effect on the data set. We saw that when we were doing that applet with the correlation by eye. So here's a great one again already. We have this really strong negative relationship. So I'm going to go ahead and put in negative 0.9 for it because it's a really, really strong relationship. But if all I do is add a point really far out here, so I'm going to say 2020. Let's just watch how that affects this correlation. So negative 0.96 by 1 point becomes negative 0.6327. So this 1 point can have a drastic effect on what we see with our relationship. So being careful of just those type of ideas as